Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. In today's gospel, Jesus tells the well-known parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. It's a stark contrast in attitudes and prayer styles. It could be subtitled Pride versus Humility. Devout Jews in the time of Jesus engaged in 2 or 3 prayer sessions a day. Once in the morning, once in the evening, and sometimes at the noon hour. Prayer was also considered to be especially effective when it was done in the temple. So during those 3 time periods, many people would go up to the temple to pray. Uncharacteristically, if you read between the lines, we're actually tipped off as to how this story is going to end by the words in the very first sentence of the passage. Luke writes, Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. And since we all know that Jesus is not a big fan of self-righteous or hateful people, we know it's not going to work out well for them in the end. He tells us of 2 men who went up to the temple to pray. First, there is the Pharisee. True prayer, as we know, is always offered to God and to God alone. But telling the parable, Jesus says the Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. The Pharisee didn't really go up to the temple to pray. He went to tell God what a wonderful person he was, he being the Pharisee. He arrogantly starts out thanking God that he's not like other people, the big-time sinners, like the greedy, the dishonest, the adulterous, or even like this tax collector who was near to him. Now, to the Pharisee's credit, it was easy for him to succumb to the temptation of thinking he was better than all those other people because he really was a good man. He fasted twice a week, when Jewish law only required fasting 1 day of the year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. He paid tithes on his entire income, when the Jewish law only required one to tithe 10% of their grain harvest and the firstborn of their animal flock. But the Pharisee, though he was by legal standards a good man, lacked something important. He lacked compassion for other people. In fact, he despised other people. Then we have the tax collector. He's a complete contrast to the prideful Pharisee. Even the tax collector's body language displays a repentant attitude. The Pharisee would have entered the main part of the temple and found a place, as was the Jewish custom, where he could stand and raise his hands and eyes to heaven to address God. The tax collector, on the other hand, stood off at a distance, probably in the temple's outer courtyard, realizing that he was unworthy to enter such a holy place and be amongst holy people. The tax collector is so humble, he does not dare raise his eyes to heaven for fear that God would think he considered himself worthy to approach God. Instead, as a sign of anguish and repentance, he beats his breast. But it's the content of his prayer that differentiates the tax collector from the Pharisee more than anything else. Whereas the Pharisee considered prayer an occasion to tell God how good he was, the tax collector saw it as an opportunity to acknowledge God as the source of mercy, and he begged for forgiveness. "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner," he said. And Jesus says at the end of the parable, the tax collector went home justified before God, and the Pharisee did not. To be honest about it, there's some of the pride of the Pharisee and some of the humility of the tax collector in all of us. To a greater or lesser degree, in today's gospel, Jesus is calling each of us to make the journey from pride to humility. The easiest way to do that is to go off to a quiet place and mentally compare your life to the life of Jesus. Nothing will move you down the road to humility faster than that.